Welcome, everyone, to the session tonight. So we're going to start a new series. We'll see where it goes. Last week we, excuse me, we started to talk about the not so secret teachings of non-duality. And I mentioned that often with non-duality, the talk around non-duality tends to remain at the philosophical level, and I'm wanting to find a way to make it to make it a deep practice and a practical applied application of it. So that's what we're kind of diving into it. So as it kind of arose for me to do this, I realized what a challenge it was. There's nothing really to get out in the world of books and talks. It basically had to come from my own practice. So let's dive in. As I said before, there's the first step, right? I talked about the two steps. The first step is to notice when you're believing a thought and letting go of believing your thoughts, realizing deeply that thoughts are not facts. No thought is absolutely true. So this is really the first step, not taking your thoughts so seriously. Because thoughts really they really call for attention, right? It's like a thought comes up, goes, no, this is really important. You better believe this and move with this. And it's you might see some resistance in the thinking mind to not believing thoughts. But this is really the first step, is not getting kind of tied up in that mind-created self. Because that's really what's being produced and maintained through thought is this illusory self. So it's a mind-created self that's constantly reproducing itself in thought, through thought, by means of thought. And so that's the first step in the process. So the second step, and the first step is a big enough challenge, right? I mean, it's who many of us see who we are. Many, perhaps not here tonight, but in society at large, if we really looked at it, it would be people would identify with their thoughts as who they were. Was it Descartes who the famous saying? Descartes really actually wanted to know who he was at his core, and looked and looked and looked and looked and looked some more, and thought, well, the only kind of constant is that I'm constantly thinking. So this must be who I am. With the saying, I think, therefore I am. Well, in truth, you think, therefore you think that's who you are. There's many ways it could be put, but he kind of didn't go far enough in looking at what his essential nature truly is. So that's what we're really wanting to do here, is to move beyond this mind-created self, this world of abstract, conceptual thought, and really touch into the deeper nature, our true nature, or non-dual reality is what I'm calling it here. It's all the same thing, right? In the guided meditation, it was presence. I call it beingness. It's a non-dual reality, our essential nature, our true nature, and so on. It's really the core of this practice. And really, what I keep coming back to is this is the direct teaching, is how to see and sense into, and then live from, or allow life to live through you from this realization. So I've kind of played around with this, and I like the word portal. I've used the word access points and other words, but I like the word portal because it's kind of giving us a glimpse into this, this, you could call it, other dimension of being. It's a way to access. And this is really what the practice boils down to for me. So I came up with four, but there's more that'll come up, and I think that's why it can be an ongoing series, as we can kind of come up with more and more portals. But one portal is, sensing the silence within, that silent, still space that's around the breath. And so we'll talk about that one. Another is noticing the arising of sense objects, this sense consciousness, this contact with the world. And that can also be an access point. The body, really sensing into the energetic aspect of the body, feeling the aliveness in the body. And of course, another portal is when we let things just be as they are, when we don't resist the present moment, we get glimpses of non-dual reality. So in this series, I really want to kind of explore all these different ways of connecting with this, with the field of awareness that knows experience, that knows, right? Because there's something there. I mean, we can talk about how the self's an illusion because it's mind created, right? There's the future's an illusion because the future only exists in your mind. The past exists in your mind. We can talk about those things, but there's at a deep level, there's still something that knows. There's still some essential dimension or factor that knows. So I'm giving this talk. So there's sounds, there's words, and you can just receive those sounds as words. The little me, as I sometimes call it, and I think, okay, I got to figure this out. What he's saying, I got to understand this. This is really important stuff that I need to know, and it's going to make me, if I can remember all this, it's really important to me. Well, that could be all received as the mind-made self or the little me just wanting to add more to it. If I get this, in fact, enlightenment, if I can become enlightened, that will be a really big addition to me. So that's not the way that we want to really listen. And the fact that you're here means you're likely sensing into the deeper dimension. Otherwise, you wouldn't really be here, right? Perhaps even coming tonight, there's a little struggle that goes on, right? And maybe the little me says, "Oh, should I really go? And I've got all these things I need to do, all these things." And so the little me can think of a lot of the reasons why you might not come. But then there's this deeper pull or impulse that arises that draws you here. No matter what the thoughts And the internal chatter is about why you shouldn't go. You see this on retreats a lot. People really struggle because the retreat's usually booked way down the road. Should I go? And the little one's going, oh no, maybe you shouldn't go. Maybe not ready for this. And then they go on and on about why you shouldn't. And there's this pull. And if this pull is strong enough that you arrive and you listen. You listen in a way that's not about trying to add something to yourself. It's a pull for consciousness to know itself, or awareness to become aware of itself. And it's always looking for space to kind of shine through. So in many ways, if there is anything we can do, then I'll say there is, even though really perhaps there isn't. If there is anything we can do, is just allow that space for non-dual reality to shine through. So there's some intentionality there. So you may experience this reality, this dimension of being, this awareness, presence, in an instant. It may just arise just through in your daily life. You see, I've talked about this before, your sunset, and you're in awe. And the mind just kind of isn't chattering. And there's this space. And you get you can maybe sense into the deeper presence. Or sometimes it happens when we're astonished, when we're, we see something and the mind can't really categorize it. So it's just kind of almost, the mind's paralyzed in a way, so that again, that leaves space for presence to shine through. And over time, we kind of learn how to pay attention to it. We sense into, oh, this here it is. This is utterly peaceful. It's utterly joyous. It's a causeless joy. We might also say that it's also the place from which insights arise. When we touch into this place, insights arise, so that it sees through the layers of illusions and barriers. And as I've said in past talks, this is where the deeper intelligence lies. Talked about this true intelligence, this natural intelligence. And this is also where this resides. And it's within us all. It's not something you have to produce, or in fact, the more you try to produce it, or the more the little me tries to understand it, it's an impediment. It is within all of us, but it goes unnoticed and often lies dormant. But as I said in the last talk, I think there is an evolutionary shift that's occurring, where people are connecting more and more with non-dual reality, with their true nature. Partly because teachings are more readily available, partly because we're communicating in ways like this that allow us to create communities, spiritual communities in new ways, where we can support each other in our explorations of this. So there are many reasons, and perhaps because we know deep down that if we don't evolve in some way, that we will kill ourselves off as a species. There's, and that would be kind of a drag. I mean, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be it's not the end of everything. Of course, we're just a small blip, I imagine, in the whole cosmos. But it would be nice if humanity could continue and consciousness could flower within the humanity that exists here on planet Earth. So it's within all of us. It's simply a matter of noticing. And noticing is a funny word. Eh? We use that word a lot. Have you noticed? We use that word a lot. And just notice. Often I say, you'll hear taught just. It's not. It's a big thing. There's nothing just about it. Noticing is huge. It's powerful. Because as soon as you notice, you're no longer identified with it. Think about that. As soon as you notice something, so thought arises, and you notice, thought arose. You're no longer identified with it. In the noticing is the disidentification, which then allows you to connect at a much deeper level. I just looked at the time. My preamble just ate up half the time, but I really want to give the background to where I'm going with this. I think it's crucial to, because this is it, right? We're how do we sense into non-dual reality? How do we? Because we talk about all this, but what's it mean to touch it, to transcend the egoic mind, the self-made, mind-made self, to transcend that and touch into this deeper dimension? What practices? How can we invite it? How can we open space for it? So this is what I'd like to explore without getting too caught up in the me doing something, right? Because we have to get away from the little me wanting to attain something to add to itself, to realizing that's always a pitfall in giving this kind of teaching. But if we can so I kind of believe step one is so crucial, not believing your thoughts, because thoughts are what create the mind-made me, as I'm calling it tonight. So with all that said, we can use sense perceptions. Right? We're constantly perceiving with our senses. So for human beings, sight is really our primary sense. So much of what we take in is through our sight, and probably hearing is our second sense, most important sense. So for closing our eyes, then really hearing what's around becomes a sense door that's receiving, perceiving. So as we're engaging in this way on a Zoom session, it's likely hearing that is your primary sense. You're listening to all the words. Perhaps there's some internal sounds. Noticing my stomach growling a little. It's little sounds, the environment that goes on, just listening. Just listening with this kind of open presence. So in a way, can you think of listening to the silence that's around the words, the spaces between the words? Just kind of an open, receptive listening. Because the words themselves and the language being used are very dualistic. So there's a deeper receiving of what is being said. And our lives are filled with dualistic, object-based consciousness. It's where we often reside. You know, the Buddha was one of the 4 foundations of mindfulness was sense consciousness. So he put out, thought, body, sense consciousness, and Dhamma or phenomenon as found the foundations for our awareness practice. This one is just using the sense perceptions. John Kabat-Zinn has a book called Coming Back to Your Senses. And it's a book about how we can access our wisdom and healing, really, the way he approached it through noticing what's coming through our sense doors, what's our sense perceptions. One teacher I had called it, receiving sense perceptions with naked awareness, bare attention. So often we hear something. What happens? Most times we hear something and the mind starts to comment, interpret and comment. The mind made me. Better stop using that one. It's a bit of a mouthful. The little me interprets and comments on what's happening constantly, all according to its conditioning. It's all conditioned, commenting, and most of the time your mind is commenting on what it's hearing. Excuse me. On what is seen or heard, smelt. So is it possible to look not through the conditioned mind that constantly comments, but rather looking that comes through an unconditioned field of silence? And everybody has this within them, and you actually do it during your daily life. You do this. This awareness will kind of come forward and listen in this way, but it often goes unnoticed. So be on the lookout for when it happens. I was going to say accidentally. It is kind of or unintentionally might be the better word, where it just happens that you listen in this way. So I'll put it another way. When you see something, let's go back to sight. When you see something, there's this moment when it's just true seeing. That moment before the mind comments, before the mind labels, before the mind interprets. There's a little moment when you're just with the object that's being seen. There's a gap between the seeing and the commentary. For most people, that gap is so small that it's almost imperceptible. And they're not conscious of it. But there's a moment of just seeing, true seeing, just seeing happening. So the practice is really to notice that and to kind of stay with that true seeing or direct seeing. In a way, we're widening the gap. The more we practice in that way, the wider the gap can get. The gap just gets longer. And as I said, you may notice this most when it's, awe-inspiring or astonishing or shocking things that you see. Where the mind can't immediately process and categorize and interpret. So the mind almost is paralyzed for those moments. That's that you can really notice the gap in those moments. For me, the gap was the longest. For me, when I'd look at very beautiful things in nature. Could be landscapes, sunsets. I think that probably why I'm continually drawn to the beauty of nature. The gap was the longest. So you find out what kind of where that gap has some space for you, and intentionally place yourself in that environment. So we really were in our practice, we're inviting this state, this sensing, way of seeing. We're inviting it, which otherwise would only happen accidentally. So we're inviting it, and also when it does happen accidentally, to notice it. There's kind of two things that's part of our practice, is noticing the gap when it happens on its own. Noticing, there's that space, the space, allowing non-dual reality, true nature to shine through, and really sense into that moment. So notice it. And the other is to invite it. To invite it. So practice could be just going around and looking at things and just being with the objects. When the mind starts to interpret and comment, let's move on to another object. See how long you can just be with the object as it is. Nature's great for this. You can take a patch of ground. I mean, you don't have to go on big hikes. You can take a patch of ground that's, a meter by a meter, and just sit and look. There's so much going on in that little space. There's probably little insects and things growing and different, just, and not that there's no need to describe it, but just kind of giving an idea of the vast complexity that exists in a square meter of Earth, of the planet, and just be with whatever is seen as it's seen. Notice that moment of clear perception, that unconditioned perception. Notice that moment of unconditioned, clear perception that arises before the mind comes in with commentary. And as you notice this moment, it tends to get longer and longer. The gap widens. For me, this was a tremendous aha moment, really, when I realized that I could be with sense objects in this way, just being with whatever is seen with a kind of unconditioned perception. So what's being perceived takes on a new depth, vitality, aliveness. Because, our labels, our concepts, they're good for, some things operating in the world. We acquire them, but they're flat. They're kind of dull, right? The difference between the word, the label maple tree, and directly perceiving a maple tree couldn't be further apart. The label is just flat. It's a concept. It's just a concept. It's lifeless. So it's just a concept, lifeless label. So the more labels you have about something, actually, the farther from the truth of that thing you are. The more labels you have, so the more farther from the truth of it. And I think trees are great teachers. My mother told me when I was a kid, I used to sit and I'd stare at a square meter of the back lawn. And what I remember is watching ants carry things and build things. And she said, she didn't really need to need a babysitter, because I could just sit and the ants were were babysitting me, because they would entertain me for some time. And I remember being amazed at this whole other world. To me, as a child, this is like a whole other amazing, mysterious world that existed under the ground. And they would just come up every once in a while to dig their tunnels. And so I knew they had all these tunnels. And I thought that was amazing, that what it would be like to live in all these tunnels. So really connecting with the liveliness, the truth of the objects that are being perceived. So nature is a perfect teacher. Trees are great teachers, right? Trees are just they're just really wanting to teach us. They're trying to connect with us and teach us still silence. Like, what could you think? So they're just there, still and silent. They move very little, unless the wind blows. And then they just blow with the wind. They move with the wind. There's no resistance. Ever notice that? The tree just moves. Because if it gets too windy, they can break, but then they drop seeds or whatever, and new ones grow. But just trees. So, maybe start with nature before you jump into people. Just say start with something that's people gets more complicated, but we'll get to that. And of course, there's ourselves, all the labels we have about ourselves. So we can also be free of the prison of our own mental labels. It's not just nature, it's labels we have about everything, including ourselves. The me is simply a bundle of labels and concepts, mind-made. So that's why we're also so far away from seeing the truth of ourselves, because we have so many labels and concepts about ourselves. We spend our entire lives reinforcing this illusory sense of self. It's wanting more, wanting to add. It's either wanting, right, desiring, or fearing and not wanting. The dance of the reproduction of the self. So I'll leave it there in terms of a practice, going into nature, sensing into that moment of unconditioned, clear perception, just being with what is seen or heard in nature. And then just doing one, going to the next one. If a label arises, that's fine. It's not a problem. That's just what the mind's conditioned to do, right? You can also notice that. Again, it's just noticing. As soon as you notice it, you're no longer identified. And just move on to another object, another sense perception. And just see the gap. The more you do that, the wider that gap will become between the direct perception and the mind jumping in with commentary. And then the gap may be very small, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, longer and wider. It kind of, it seems like it might seem like you're getting nowhere at first, but once the gap gets a little bit wide, it's almost like a dam. It's a tiny hole in it. Not much water comes through, but if the hole just gets a little bit bigger, it's kind of a rush of, so that space can widen quite quickly as you are more and more perceiving from that place of presence, rather than from the place of labels. I'll open it up. I went a little bit over my preamble. Took longer than I anticipated, but yeah. Open it up to any questions or comments. Oh, and Jason did inform me that he needed to leave because he didn't think he'd like the talk, so he would probably have to leave before he no, and he wants to read a poem before he does leave. Jason.
Thank you, Stephen. So much of that wonderful talk really resonated with me, like really deeply. And yeah, just seeing everyone on the screen here, it's just amazing. So I'm going to read this poem. It kind of came to me after some meditations this past week. I feel like it's like you were, Stephen, it's like you were, some of your words were like, I felt like it was like you already read the poem. It's funny. Okay. So it's called My Heart is an Echo Chamber. My heart is an echo chamber, the grand resonator of all sound, myth, and catastrophe throughout the eons. Patiently sitting with it all, being with it, for the sake of just that, until the moment of possibility of reconciliation and rebirth comes forth once again, out of grayness to bring darkness to light and lightness to dark. My heart is an echo chamber for all things created and uncreated. Longing so deeply to know the conditionless source of truth, lies, and integration. My heart is an echo chamber, a marvelous cacophony of right and wrong, realized as the sweetest sound and orchestral stillness and silence. My heart is an echo chamber, a tapestry finely woven out of numberless interconnected sphereless spheres. The understanding that the only possibility is the impossible. My heart is an echo chamber of unspoken words, of infinite sweeping reverberations, illusions from every moment of time, past, present, and future, including the illusion of time itself, swirl around inside here, caught up in sweet mystical whirling gales, spinning and brushing past one another. In the name of remembrance and atonement. Everything smiles here, exchanging deep, knowing glances into the eyes and souls of everything else. Also that one day I might recall the voice of nature calling out from darkest ocean depths to highest mountain peaks, to the end of space and back again. The courageous declaration that indeed I am always right where I need to be. Right now, all of nature is celebrating in song, dancing, and laughing, with glee and unfathomable delight. In each one of these things I call moments. A great revelry of everything, of me, of you, and all of this. My heart is an echo chamber of love.
Yeah, thank you, Jason.
Thank you. I have to get going, unfortunately, but it's been such a pleasure to be here tonight with everyone. And I wish you all a really wonderful week.
See you next week, Jason. Take care.
Hi, Jason.
That's beautiful. So yeah, any questions or comments about the talk or that poem or anything else that's coming up in your practice?
Thank you, Stephen. As Jason said, that was wonderful. So as you were talking, I wrote down in my notes, childlike wonder. And when we were traveling, I was observing my three children who are 18, 15, and 8. And every single place we went to, each person had a completely different experience. They just were looking at the same thing, but they were seeing different things. So I was thinking about what it's like to travel with children, and I've been traveling with them since they were toddlers. And this gap that you speak of, that one moment, I don't notice until I see it through their eyes. So there'll be times where I've traveled with them where one of the kids would say, "Look at this thing on the floor." And I would have just walked right by it. And then she would point at it, and then I would just see a thing until the moment I interpreted that it's just a stone or a rock or just floor. But what you spoke of reminded me of that childlike wonder of just seeing something for the first time and not knowing anything about it, not understanding it, not interpreting it, as you said, no conditioning, so no previous conditioning. And it made me think about how many times we're just not only looking at things and then straight to interpreting them, but walking by things and not having that opportunity, like you said, to invite it. So that's all. My only comment was that just to me, I interpreted all of that as, or compared it to the childlike wonder that children have that I see through my kids. So thank you. That was great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, children, so who we give children all our labels, right? And in many ways, it seems like they need to go through that at some level. It appears that way anyway. So if a child sees a tree for the first time, says, "Well, what's that, mommy?" What do we say? Or what's that, grandpa or grandma? What do we say? We say, "That's a tree." Oh, so they take that sound, that collection of sounds, and they file it away. Oh, that's what that is. It's this. Next time, oh, there's a tree. Oh, there's a tree. Maybe as they get older, oh, it's a maple tree. They might get more sophisticated in there. But we could say, well, let's go explore what this is. Let's touch it. Let's look at it. Just kind of that because they're in a preconceptual knowing, real time. And you can actually allow them that space, that gap before you insert. Because now the label doesn't come until you bring it up. So there's a natural, this gap, and you could actually play around with that tree before you call it a tree, with that object for quite some time. Then you just go, yeah, and sort of at the end when you're finished exploring, yeah, and you know, we give that beautiful object this label called tree, and then just and then kind of leave it at that. And just think of that space that would open as objects get explored in that way, because children do have that gap when the labels are not, especially when the labels are not present concepts. Like I say, the more you learn about something, the further away you get from the truth of it. Right? The more concepts, and further you get away from the actual unconditioned, clear perception of it, the truth of it, the unconditioned truth of it. We have a lot of ideas and can talk about it for hours on end. Very far from the truth of it. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a really good way to understand this exploration that we're doing from that childlike perspective.
Maybe I'll just share with everybody. Last week, you talked about step one, which was not believing our thoughts. And so I actively practiced that. And you suggested what you called a roaming around meditation, which I did as I went through my day. If I noticed thoughts coming up, and of course it sometimes I'd notice thoughts coming up right away, other times I would get totally lost in them, but eventually you realize, oh, I've been thinking. But I practiced when I noticed the thoughts, just saying the phrase, not true. And just in saying that, I noticed there was this instant letting go and a release and a relief. And I just found that practice very powerful. And so I just wanted to share that with you, that I found that a very useful practice. So thank you.
So yeah, continue the wandering around meditation. Because really this practice that I just offered tonight in terms of your being with clear perception of sense objects is, again, it's a wandering around meditation. It's not really a meditation you can do sitting with your eyes closed. I mean, you can do it with your eyes closed and use sound, but I find it's more it's more lively. It's you can perhaps see the gap more with sight if you become aware of the gap with sight. So yeah, again, another wandering around meditation. You could do that thoughts meditation for a year. Because we believe so many thoughts, you know. Kind of writing down thoughts can be helpful, you know. Sometimes you would go, a thought will come up, you go, yeah, I really, really believe that one. And you kind of write it down and go, oh, there it is. It's just a bunch of words. It's not truth, right? It's so you can writing down the most believed thoughts that I have can also be helpful in not taking our thinking so seriously. Yeah, I always wanted to offer a retreat with the title something like, you know, your thoughts don't matter, or something like that. We just spend a week exploring the fact that, you know, thoughts are not true, and they really don't matter, and there's no need to take them all so seriously, even though they're screaming so loudly to be taken seriously, right? I don't know if you had that experience, Lori, where, you know, you kind of, that's not true. It's not true. And sometimes you just go, damn right, it's true. And this is why it's true. And, you know, you can actually almost have this internal argument going on between the little me and the truth of trying to, appearing. Yeah. To notice that, you can notice that as well, how powerful the addiction to thinking is. Because it really is an addiction, right? We're addicted to thinking in so many ways. Screw those thoughts, says someone, and then, well, so this is a practice nothing I said will make any sense at the level of thoughts. It really has to be engaged with in life, and or in meditation, whatever sort of resonates for you. But the recommendation is to engage in this practice, multiple times per day, whenever you remember, especially when you remember that moment of, I think I'll practice that clear perceiving practice that was spoken about. That's a powerful moment, because that's presence itself peeking through, and so take that moment of that remembering and practice it for a while, anytime during the day. So meditation isn't something we just need to do in the morning and then start doing what the mind-made self would normally do. It's something that we can engage with throughout the day. And so I really recommend, I usually use the word invite. For some reason, I use the word recommend, which is a little more perhaps stronger. I really recommend that you engage with this multiple times during the day. And both of them, just not believing the thoughts, and the other one, just seeing how long the gap is when you just clearly, with clear, unconditioned perception, can be with an object. And of course, labels will come in. That's not a problem. So just notice, oh, there's the label. Next object. Oh, the label came maybe quickly. Maybe cup appeared right away. An object. Oh, the label. There's noticing how long the gap was. An object. Oh, maybe the label didn't appear because you didn't know what it was. That on purpose. So just, notice that perhaps when there's an object that you're just with and the mind can't categorize and label, that the sense into that space that appears. But at the age that most of us are at, we've seen a lot of objects. You pretty well have to maybe go to another country like Ioana did and see some objects that may or perhaps not within our usual repertoire of sight. And that's why travel is such an interesting practice as well. Being with these sense perceptions, just seeing, not needing to label. Not needing to label. And of course, I've said this so many times, but I'll say it again. It doesn't mean we never use our labels and our concepts, and we don't use our mind. Of course, we use all that we go through our day. But when you can utilize the mind from the place of presence, it's very different than being used by the mind throughout the day, where the mind just pulls you around. You're really using the mind when it's appropriate to do practical things, and concepts are necessary to do practical things. For us to all be here, we had to use clock time, which is an illusion. But we used it so we could all be here. I have a watch. So I use clock time so that I can be places. There'd be some teachers in India, I know there was a teacher, didn't have a watch, never had gave a talk at a particular time. And his students would just sit around all day and night because he could appear at 3 a.m. and start giving a talk. Well, that worked over in that context, right? They're a little bit used to their teachers behaving in these ways. Here, if I said, I'm going to do, every once in a while, I'm going to do a Zoom session, but it's just when it kind of arises for me, then, you might not sit on your Zoom connection all day and night waiting for the teacher to appear. So we use all these concepts and, to operate, but what we're doing here is seeing their true nature and then touching into the non-dual reality, which is our essential nature, our non-dualistic totality, interconnected one, sensing into that. So if you have any questions while you're doing the practice, by all means, feel free to email me if you want to talk more in a way over Zoom or telephone. That's fine too, because this is a very deep practice, and if you engage with this wholeheartedly, stuff shifts. Stuff will shift. Yeah. So take care, everyone, and next week we'll explore another portal. And I'll give you another practice to do. Yeah. So take care. Be well, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. Stay
Thank you,
well.
Stephen.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Have a good week.
Good night.
Bye.
Night, everybody.
Bye.